Hi, my name's Paul Hewlett. I'm the pastor at Grove Chapel in Camberwell in South London. And this is a session on the subject which is called Truth Taken Hostage. What truth has been taken hostage? Has truth been taken hostage? Well, as I share a PowerPoint presentation, I invite you to watch and to see what we're talking about on this video. So we're talking about the whole area of human identity and sex and gender and God. What does God say about all these areas? And the answer is, he says a very great deal, which I want to look at with you for a time now. So we might ask a question straight off. Haven't we got more important things to talk about now than this? We are in the first month or so of a European war. We are familiar with these devastating scenes from Ukraine. And maybe now isn't the time to have some debate about a subject that seems so trivial, perhaps, compared to the actual lives and deaths of women and children and the displacement of millions of people from their homes in Ukraine. Well, I want us to be quite clear that this is actually a subject of tremendous importance about the whole human race. It affects identity, it affects who you are. It is vitally important that we understand these things. I trust that you will understand and agree with me as we go through this. Some questions though. Has the truth really been taken hostage? Is that an exaggeration? Does truth even exist? And these are big questions, aren't they? Is there really such a thing as truth? Some of you may know that it was Pontius Pilate who asked Jesus, according to John 18, verse 38, 2,000 years ago, what is truth? Does truth even exist at all? Is a great question. And as many might ask these days, is something true only for individuals rather than for everyone? Is it right to talk about objective truth, or is truth only something that is subjective for you, for me, for us, one at a time? Well, again, let's see if we can answer these questions as we go through this presentation. Some would say that we're living in a post-truth society, and there's an interesting graphic. Shows a lady with two sides to her brain, as it were. There's the very factual side on the left. You've got all those mathematical symbols. You've got a square root sign somewhere. You've got a graph near the top, all very factual. On the right, you've got her imagination. You've got her thoughts, which are maybe more emotional rather than merely factual. And Washington Post said a year or two ago, what is meant by post-truth? It's a world in which political appeals to emotion count for more than statements of verifiable fact. And it's that kind of world that we have to deal with and speak into at the moment. Because if we go only with emotion, and if emotion drives our words and our actions rather than facts, then we're going to be in trouble before very long, as we will see. Well, where are we now? Here are a few examples of the situation we're in right now. Here is a real picture of a real person, Naya Okami from Canada, and she identifies herself as a British Columbian wolf. No kidding. This was reported in the Daily Mail about 8 or 9 weeks ago. She regards herself as an otherkin therian. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but she genuinely believes that her soul is not a human soul, it is an animal soul. This is actually rather sad, isn't it? Do we take these people absolutely seriously? Do we agree with them and say, yes, you're absolutely right, that's what you are? Or do we regard them as having a problem in actual fact? Where are we now again? You may remember 3 years ago, this Gillette advert, and it showed a number of men, and these men were all doing the barbecuing the way that traditionally men are imagined to do. And there are these two boys who are fighting, and you hear all the men saying, boys will be boys. It's the way that boys are. Boys fight. And the idea of the advert was that, well, men and boys shouldn't be doing these things. There were objections made to this video implying that men were sexual harassers or violent thugs. There are lots of questions here. Is there something in the nature of being male that makes males, boys and men in general more likely to be aggressive than with girls? These are some of the issues that are being shown up in the world today. You hear a lot about toxic masculinity. You hear about things like mansplaining, and these sorts of comments are being made. But let me go further to something that's even more contemporary. And in the last few days, because I first gave this presentation last Saturday, which was the 19th of March. Well, in the last 6 days, this story has really snowballed. On the left is a swimmer. Who is this swimmer? Is this swimmer even a he or a she? Well, this swimmer's name is Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas was formerly ranked number 462 as a male swimmer, but now is swimming and competing as a female swimmer. He became she, or they, or however we describe them. And you can see that the three swimmers on the right, who are born women and have always been women, are standing together with a measure of protest against this Leah Thomas winning a race for female swimmers. Leah Thomas began transitioning from being male to female at the age of 20. And here's a fact, still has male body parts and changes with female swimmers. Sharon Davis, former British silver medalist a good number of years ago, has said that this is injustice. And many have waded into this debate in the last few days, including the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has talked about the importance of biology in all of this. This debate has a long, long way to go. It can only get more serious and I think more intense as time goes by. Then I've got a fourth, where are we now, to show you as well. And I think in many ways, this is the saddest one of all of them. Here's a lady on her wedding day, looking very, very happy, as you would expect and hope that a bride might be on her wedding day. What's interesting about that picture? You might say, well, nothing really. I mean, she's happy, she's dressed like a bride. The issue is that even if you were to zoom out, you wouldn't find a man or a woman, indeed, in that picture whom she is getting married to. She said, I got married to myself. I was ridiculously happy and the vibe was amazing. And we read in the Stylist, this is a couple of years old now, sologamy is one of the biggest relationship trends for 2020, with more and more women choosing to honor their relationship with themselves rather than date other people. What do you think about that? Is that odd? Is that sad? Is that tragic? Is that just something you shrug off and say, fair enough? Let's think about maybe later on why this is a very, very worrying development indeed. More materials. There's a book that's done the rounds in some schools, Jamie, a transgender Cinderella story. And in this story, you have Jamie, who is a girl, but Jamie, being a girl, can't go to the ball, whatever sort of ball this is, because she's a girl. But Jamie's into things that maybe boys tend to enjoy doing more than girls, maybe. She likes fixing things, likes fixing cars and motorbikes and trucks and things like that. And in the end, she's told by her own fairy godmother, she can go to the ball because really she is a boy. She discovers that she's been a boy all along. That's the story of Jamie, transgender Cinderella story. I say schools, not all schools, not all primary schools, secondary schools necessarily go as far as others in terms of this sort of material, but some certainly do. And if I just show you this for a while, if I just move my own picture so you can see most of what is there, the genderbread person. And this certainly is being shown in some schools. And the idea is that when you look at every human being, whether it's the mind, that is the identity that we have in our mind, on the left, the way that we express ourselves, the heart, the people that is that we are attracted to, and even the actual sex that we are, there is, as you can see with all the various arrows, according to transgender ideology, people are all on something of a spectrum. In your own identity, you can move more towards womanness or more towards manness. You're not one nor the other. Most people, they suggest, are somewhere from one side to the other in between. How you express yourself. Do you express yourself more female or more feminine or more masculine? Who are you attracted to sexually, and who are you attracted to romantically? And these are shown, suggested to be different things, more towards women, more towards men. Again, the idea of there being a spectrum. And then even in terms of biological sex, that it's not clear, if you follow this sort of logic, whether anybody is clearly necessarily female or male, that there are rather tendencies or trends that people tend to move towards. Now, is this actually true to reality? We'll come and ask that right at the end. And I think you'll anticipate the answer is it isn't true to reality on the ground, gender-bred person. So let's go to some more formal medical definitions according to a publication called Medical News Today. What are gender and what is sex? This is how it's defined according to this source. And this is being accepted more and more broadly today. A person's gender is how they identify internally and how they express this externally. And we're hearing more and more about something called expressive individualism, that we express what we are on the inside by the way we show ourselves on the outside. And that on the inside, we determine our identity by who we think we are. And so people may use clothing, appearances, and behaviors to express the gender that they identify with. The World Health Organization, which has become quite sort of well known across the world because of COVID in the last couple of years, has noted that gender is a social construction that people typically describe in terms of femininity and masculinity, as though that were just one pair of options that people tend to choose, femininity or masculinity. And in Western cultures, people associate femininity with women and masculinity with men, but this social construction varies across cultures. Really? For how long? How many cultures? How many people? Is this not a recent and alarmingly accelerating trend only among a few cultures, is the question. And yet, though it's only a small number of people, it's gaining rapid acceptance. And this is what the WHO and others, Medical News Today, are increasingly saying. Gender is not neatly divided along the binary lines of man and woman. This whole idea of binary is being resisted and rejected out of court. It is increasingly viewed as quite wrong, almost immoral to say that gender is binary, one or the other. What about sex? A person's sex is typically based on certain biological factors such as their reproductive organs, genes, and hormones. You hear people talking about sex and gender being assigned at birth, as though people, we, whether it's the doctors or the nurses or the parents or the individual themselves, actually have that sort of final authoritative say on what somebody's sex is, and it's based on biological factors. Well, are these not absolutely determinative of a person's sex, rather than just being something that contributes towards somebody's sex. And listen to this, like gender, sex is not binary, right? Okay. A person may have the genes that people may associate with being male or female, but their reproductive organs, genitals, or both may look different. Which is a way of saying that people, by having sex changes or maybe intersex conditions, which are very rare, really confuses the whole picture of the binary nature of male or female. But again, we'll look at that at the end and what we can say about that. Now then, any of you watching this will recognize those faces, those four faces. Rupert Grint and Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson, and of course J.K. Rowling, whose Harry Potter novels made these three young child actors incredibly famous and wealthy. And this would have been taken, this picture, around about the time, I suppose, of the first premiere of the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone back in around 2000, 2001. And at the time, those three young actors would have posed very happily with the creator of Harry Potter, no problem at all with that. But something's happened more recently that you may be aware of. A couple of years ago, J.K. Rowling, entering into this whole transgender debate, she asked a question. People who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out. Wimben, wimpund, womant? Well, you can see where she's going. You could argue she's being slightly provocative in that. Well, many people assume she was, because there was a tremendous backlash against J.K. Rowling because of her saying these things. And the three actors we've just seen, now of course in their 30s, have completely distanced themselves from J.K. Rowling. And you may have seen this on the bottom right, this advert in the New York Times a few weeks ago. Liana is imagining Harry Potter without its creator. The views of J.K. Rowling about transgender have been viewed as being unacceptable, and she's been cancelled as a consequence of this. Is that right? You see, we're in a world now where even freedom of speech is no longer something that an awful lot of people are saying is a good thing. People are saying, no, we must not be free to say certain things. Views like hers are dangerous and hateful and must not be admitted. So how many genders are there? Well, on the right of the screen, you can see a number of symbols which may give an indication that contemporary gender ideology suggests that there are rather a lot. I just plugged that question straight into Google a week or so ago. How many genders are there? And the first three answers I got out were these: 58, 68, 220 plus, which isn't very definitive, is it? Or very precise. It doesn't really answer the question. It says, well, there's different answers to that one question. And here are a few of them. Here are a few of the genders that you can nowadays apparently identify as. Demi-boy, non-binary gender identity, somebody who is partially boy, man, or masculine, you could be that. Gender void, somebody without a gender identity, similar to agender, but usually associated with a feeling of loss or lack of gender. Novigender, novigender people who use this gender identity experience having a gender that can't be described using existing language due to its complex and unique nature. So you really don't have yet the terminology with other gender identities to describe what this gender is. And then there's even trigender, the experience of having three gender identities simultaneously or over time. Three genders. I guess you could add more to three, couldn't you? I think we can see where we're going with this, that the number of genders is just going to grow and grow and grow, and they overlap with each other. You can see the symbols on the right. The symbols tend to develop and become more and more complex and incorporate different features of other gender symbols. In other words, we're in complex confusion in this whole area, aren't we? Gender fluidity, as it's often spoken of. What do we mean by gender fluidity? There's no fixed number of genders because, and also there's so much overlap. You have Venn gender, like a whole host of Venn diagram circles overlapping each other. Gender's based, this is really important, gender is based on what the individual feels about themselves, rather than any external, objective, scientific data. Remember my earlier slide about post-truth and how emotion becomes the dominant thing here, rather than facts. It's what you think you are. It's expressive individualism. I feel I'm something. I believe on the inside, because of my feelings, that I am such and such a gender. Therefore, that's what I am. That's what I identify as. Just notice again the diagram here. There's no binary here. No, there's a spectrum. The female kind of merges into the male, but very few people are really one or the other. We're all somewhere on that mix, somewhere on that spectrum. Gender fluidity means also that a person's gender is not fixed. It can change over time. You could maybe move around this spectrum over the course of a number of years. That is the growing ideology that we are seeing. And Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland has, the whole Scottish government, Scottish Parliament has been pushing through the ease of gender choice in recent times. It was reported in the Herald a few weeks ago. Ministers intend to publish their bill on Thursday, setting out proposed measures for people born male to be declared female and vice versa, without having to provide medical evidence of gender dysphoria, as long as they have been living in their acquired gender for 3 months. In other words, you don't need to wait for 2 years. You don't need to provide any medical evidence from any doctor that you have this gender dysphoria or this sense of being in the wrong body. No, you just need to somehow give some indication you've been living in your acquired gender for 3 months, and then without anything else, you can change your gender identity legally. That's where things are going, particularly in Scotland and in other parts of the world, not yet in England, but in other parts of the world, certainly. What is the trend? What do I mean by that? Let me just reveal this. I mean the trend in terms of over time, how many people are beginning to identify as changing their gender. Well, 11 years ago, how many 14 to 17-year-olds were referred to the Tavistock Clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service, because of confusion and wanting to look at their gender and their identity? How many young people of that age range? The answer, 138. If you roll forward 9 years to 2019 to 20, same question. How many 9 years later? What do you think the answer might be? I'll reveal it in 3, 2, 1 seconds. 2,748. That's almost a 20-fold increase in the number of young people being referred to the Gender Identity Development Service. And a graph there just shows that trend over time. It is flattening off, which is interesting and maybe significant. It's also interesting that, of course, as you can see, girls tend rather more than boys to be identified for this service. It's also true that girls tend to be referred at a younger age than boys, probably because girls hit puberty generally a year or two earlier than boys do. Another question, does this make people free and happy? What do you think? Another statistic, 52% of all transgender and non-binary young people in the US seriously contemplated killing themselves in the year 2020. And the same source, Forbes, reports more than half thought it would be better to be dead rather than trying to live with rejection, isolation, loneliness, bullying, and being targeted by politicians and activists pushing anti-trans legislation. Now, there's a question here, isn't there? Is it simple enough? Is it right simply to say, well, of course, it's the reaction of people, it's bullying, it's these activists, it's these anti-trans people, that's the only problem? Is that the only reason why more than half of these transgender, non-binary young people are so depressed? Is their becoming transgender and the reaction to it simply the cause of their depression? Or is there something deeper going on? Is there something about the very identity of what it means to be human that we need to be thinking about here? These are the really big questions to explore. And with all of this, we can really do, when we boil it down, just one of two things, like a double-sided coin. We can ignore all these problems, shrug them off, let them just go away and say, never mind, who cares, can't do anything about it. Or else we can try to make sense of them. And it's an irresponsible attitude that says, ignore them. The right response is to say, well, let's try and make sense of what's going on with all of this. And we're going to try and do that now. So what we need is what we call a worldview, which doesn't mean literally a view of the world from an Apollo spacecraft, but it does mean a way of making sense of our world. And I would suggest that a satisfactory and adequate worldview must be the four following things. This is really important. A worldview, for it to pass muster, for it to be acceptable, must really be all of these four things. It must be realistic. It must engage with the real world and take on board real data, real observations that we find. It must satisfy people living in a real world. Secondly, it must be reasonable. That is, it must be open to reason, to scrutiny, to debate, and to logic. It must be something that we reason with facts and findings, rather than being simply a matter of groundless emotion. Thirdly, it must be comprehensive. It must comprehend, it must cover the whole of reality as we see it. Every case must be embraced by our worldview. Nothing can be outside it or exceptional from it. And fourthly, it must be internally consistent. It must have no contradictions within it. It must hold together as a single world view. Now, there may be other characteristics of a worldview that we need to include, but those four are enough for now. And I want you to ask the question, is what we're about to look at a realistic, reasonable, comprehensive, and consistent worldview? Well, the biblical worldview, which I, as a Christian and a pastor, hold to as revealed from God, has the Word of God at its center, and it has God himself at its center. And how does a biblical worldview view God? That's the first and most important question. Who is God? What is God? Well, he's all of these things, according to the Bible. He is our creator. He made us. We did not make ourselves. And neither did we evolve or emerge from some chance chemical or biological reactions or accidents. We were made quite deliberately and purposefully by a creator God. This stands against the whole Darwinian, neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory that says that we have emerged from simpler creatures. There is no creator. There are just blind evolutionary processes. No, biblical worldview says God made human race. Secondly, on account of that, God is our owner. He didn't only make us, he made us and said that we are his. We belong to him. We don't belong to ourselves. Again, I will come back to that at the end. Thirdly, God is our master. Why are we in this world? We are here to serve God. He is the Lord and the master of the human race. And these things all flow from each other, as I'm sure you understand. Fourthly, he is the judge. We, that is every human being, will face God and give an account to him on the last day. Take those four in for a moment. Creator God, owner God, master God, God as our judge. But then, who are we? Well, we are the image of God. And what does that mean? We can't cover it in as much detail as some do, but let's just look at the biblical references. The first record we have of the human race is in Genesis 1, verse 26, where God, having made every other creature, on the sixth day says this, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. That is, we are made to be in some way like God. And how that is so important, particularly, as I'll show in a moment, is in the whole area of relationships. That as God relates and connects and loves, we are made to do exactly the same as he is. The fact that we are made in God's image, every human being, that fact alone gives value to everyone without any exception. How many people wonder if they are of any value at all? How do we gauge our value? How do we know if people are more or less valuable? Does it depend on what people say about us, think about us, evaluate us, what we think of ourselves? All these things change and fluctuate so much, don't they? But no, this fact alone gives value to every human being. Otherwise, how do we know if we have any value or purpose in life? Now, this is something that needs to be really emphasized. All human beings are made in the image of God, regardless of all the following considerations which vary among people. So all of these may vary, and they do. It doesn't change one little bit the essential value of every human being as made in the image of God. Sex, male or female. Male and female are created equal. Indeed, male and female, both individually and together, they are the image of God. But the man is not more the image of God than the woman, nor vice versa. Both the man and the woman, the boy and the girl, are made equally in the image of God. Age, you have a small baby and you have a very elderly person, and the age of the person does not alter the value in the sight of God. Somebody may have all their life ahead of them or be at the end of their life. That doesn't mean that the life is more or less valuable in God's eyes. Then I come to another one, race. And I've put race with a question mark and inverted commas quite deliberately. Why? I just want to pause for a second on this one. Race is undoubtedly far more of a human social construct than is sex. Yes, these 7 faces have different skin colors, different tones, different hair colors, different eye colors, and all the rest of it. They vary from each other. But these variations are superficial compared to what they have in common. That they are all human souls, all human bodies, all made in the image of God. And the variations, though we can see them, it is wrong to overstate them. Now, I tread carefully here. I'm well aware that there is racism in the world and in this country, and there always has been, and racism is an evil. To treat somebody differently because of their skin color is a great wrong, a great evil. But I want to make this point. What we're seeing today is race and sex being kind of exchanged for each other. What do I mean by that? Well, in terms of sex, people are saying, as we've already seen, male and female are not binary, separate, distinct categories. No, there's a fluidity about them. There's a spectrum there, and you can move from one to the other. And you don't have to remain male or female or anything. You can sort of self-identify as something else if you want, or one or the other, and go from one to the other. There's fluidity there. But when it comes to race, people are saying increasingly, oh, no, we have to insist on very, very clear racial categories. You cannot possibly have somebody black saying they're white or white saying they're black. You have people talking about misappropriation of certain cultures as being the great evil of the day. And we have to be very, very careful here. Race and sex, it seems, have been swapped around as though there are really hard and fast divisions between races, but between sexes, oh no, nothing at all. Let all the barriers come down. I'll just add one more thing to that, and that is that the whole idea of race as something that divides people from each other is absolutely unbiblical and sub-Christian and indeed anti-Christian. It is the outcome in recent centuries of Darwinian theory, not of anything Christian. Any so-called Christian who says that any race is inferior or superior is being totally opposed to the whole teaching of the Word of God. We cannot say that emphatically enough. What else? People's background, just to hurry on a bit through these. Wealthy people, rich people, poor people. Well, there are great differences, but all are made in the image of God. And the Bible is very clear that we are not to despise anybody because of their background. Indeed, it's a great sin and evil to disparage people because they come from a different background to ourselves. Ability or disability. Again, a person is not less valued as a human being on account of any disability. Fame. You could have an extremely famous Premiership footballer who plays for one Manchester team, neither of which I'm particularly fond of. You could have a relatively obscure 1970s Spurs footballer like Steve Perryman, I believe it is, who's not so well known today except to diehard Spurs fans. But whether very famous or very obscure makes no difference, again, to the value of human beings. Time. What do I mean by time? Well, I mean this. Here is an unborn child in his or her mother's womb. And here lies the remains of somebody who has maybe died many years ago. And before birth and even before conception and after death, the actual value of the human being is not altered. The memory of those who have died is precious because they're made in God's image. The anticipation of the birth of those yet to come is precious, equally made in God's image. Morality. Two pictures now that are very topical, two people. Here they both are. Zelensky and Putin, on opposite sides in the present Russia-Ukraine conflict. Many people agreeing that Zelensky is in the right and Putin is in the wrong. And whatever kind of pairing we may put up, there is good and there is evil in this world. And yet both these men and all others, however evil or however good they may be, are made in the image of God and are valuable for that reason and that reason alone. Beliefs, just to say that there may be all sorts of religious symbols and beliefs that people follow. And of course, again, I will say this, no matter what religion or belief people follow, it does not change. They're made in God's image. And in view of today's topic, gender identity. Here are people that are protesting about trans rights. And of course, it doesn't matter what they believe. We may think that they are profoundly wrong or profoundly right. It does not change that they are valued in God's image. What does God say about male and female now? Here's the question. in the following verse from the one that we looked at a few moments ago, verse 27 of Genesis 1. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. And then it says this, male and female, he created them. The very first thing that it says to explain what man is, apart from him being in God's own image, is that God created man, male and female. These are not social constructions. This is what God established from the very beginning. And the question is then, what do male and female actually mean? Do they refer to sex? Do they refer to gender? Are those two things different? Indeed, do male and female refer to both sex and gender? What do male and female mean? Are they differentiated in the Bible? Or do we have the right to say that we can confuse them? They're just social human constructs. Is sex just about biology? Whereas gender is about psychology, which seems to be where often people are going today. The answer to this is that God made human beings as a unity of body and soul, or body and mind. God did not make the human body only and then say, well, I've made a body this way, a male-sexed body, but the gender can be what that person wants it to be. They can be male or female or something else. God made the body and the soul, and our sex, our gender, is all part of that. And there's a few verses that I think demonstrate this. The Bible gives instructions to men and women because some roles and characteristics belong to men and others belong to women. For example, Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, and here we're in the law of God being spelt out for the people of Israel, for God's people, as they were to be a holy nation, to show the nations what God was like. And one way they were to do this was to clearly differentiate between men and women in what they wore. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. Now, the idea there is that there should be sufficient difference between the way that men and women dress for people to know that they are different. It's not saying, by the way, well, a woman must never, ever, ever wear trousers or anything quite like that. But there should be some differentiation between men and women in simply the way that they are attired. Another verse in Job 38, where the Lord speaks to Job and he says, dress for action like a man. I will question you and you make it known to me. Like a man means like a male, like an adult male. In other words, be strong, Job. Listen, pay attention, hold yourself together, conduct yourself as a man. Some might say, well, is that a little bit of toxic masculinity coming in there? No, it's not. It's simply acknowledging that a man, especially, is to compose himself with a certain strength when he's under pressure. And then the flip side is this, where the Apostle Paul says to the Thessalonians, we were gentle among you like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. Why say a nursing mother rather than a tender-hearted father? Because it is given to women to bear children. It is given to women to become mothers. Of course, not all women will bear children and become mothers. I understand that. But there is that tender-hearted tendency in women to be mothers, to function as mothers, to take care of their own children. And the Bible acknowledges that particular point. Here's one even more striking that I think is worth looking at. The first baby ever born. By the way, that photo, I don't think, was necessarily the first baby ever born, although could have been, as you'll understand, because the first baby ever born was a baby called Cain. And when Cain was born, we read the following, that Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and she bore Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Genesis 4 verse 1. Now my question is this, what gave Eve the right to presume that this child was a man? How did she know that this baby child would one day be a man, or would identify as a man, or would want to be a man? Isn't there a certain amount of presumption there? Wouldn't you have been wiser to say, well, I've gotten a child with the help of the Lord who in 20 or 21 years may say, I self-identify as a man, but he might go the other way and say, no, I'm a woman instead. Well, you see where I'm going. This is really rather laughable. What's the answer to the question? Well, the picture's clear enough, I think, for us to see that even with this baby child, you could say this child is a man-child. What did Eve do? To put it quite crudely, she took a look. And she didn't say, well, I assign a gender to this child and say, I'm going to raise this child as gender assigned male. She said, God has given me a male child, a boy, a man. That's the way it's always been until recent years, where things have become so deranged, as it were, so confused and so vicious and so wrong. This child is male, and that's the way it's been. What went wrong? When sin entered the world, in came disorder, and in came confusion. Confusion that in recent years has reached this pitch that we are describing. What did the serpent say to Eve and to Adam? You will be like God, knowing good and evil. You will be able to say what good and evil are. You will be able to discern and decide what is good and what is evil. And it was the devil, Satan, who introduced the idea that people can become their own God with their own truth. Let's redefine marriage. Let's redefine sex. Let's redefine gender. Let's redefine everything. This was the scheme of the devil as an assault against God himself, to overturn what God had established. And here we are today. Without God, every individual can now decide on their own identity, their own gender, their own version of truth. A march of anarchists who say we are ungovernable. And that's the way human society goes without God. The most telling verse of all in the Bible on this is the last verse of the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that's reached such a pitch today that increasingly people are wanting to say, there is no male or female anymore. We redefine in our own way. Binary is over. I put it like this: to deny or to confuse male and female is to assault, vandalize, and destroy the image of God. There's the most famous picture maybe ever painted, Mona Lisa, hanging in the Louvre in Paris, Leonardo da Vinci. It's regarded, as you know, as one of the great masterpieces. It's behind glass. You can't get at it. It's fiercely, securely guarded. Supposing somebody thought, well, I can improve on that. I don't like that image. I want to make it different. So I'll do this to it. Is that an improvement? And of course, what it is a defacing of a masterpiece. And that is exactly what is happening when people assault male and female the way that they are doing. I'll show you this picture. Why? I think the picture on the left, in some ways, is the most symbolic one of all of the ones that we've looked at in this presentation. Leah Thomas, standing well over 6 feet tall, with male anatomy on the left, pretty much, and then the women on the right. And I've asked the question, do you like the Emperor's New Clothes? Why do I put it that way? Well, maybe you know, maybe you don't know the story of the Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. The idea that the emperor one day who was a very proud, vain man, was approached by some very cunning tailors who were real schemers and deceivers. And they said to the king, to the emperor, "Emperor, we can make you some clothes which only the most intelligent and wise people in the world can actually see. Only very clever people can see these clothes we're going to put on you, Your Majesty." And the emperor believed these swindlers. And what were they doing? Well, they weren't putting on any clothes at all. He was wearing nothing whatsoever. But he went out in front of all the people, and all his courtiers were taken in by this, and they said, "You know, the emperor's wearing some brand new clothes, but they are such amazing clothes that only the wise and the intelligent among you will be able to see these clothes." And people then, of course, became far too scared to say anything. They thought, well, I can't show up my foolishness by saying that he's not wearing anything at all, because I have to show myself to be clever and wise, and they deceive themselves. And out he goes, the emperor, in front of the crowds, until one little boy pipes up and says, "But he's not wearing anything at all." And of course, he isn't wearing anything at all, as you can see in the picture. And then gradually, the people start to join in those cries and say, you know, he's right, he's not wearing anything at all. And that's really where we are today with this whole matter of identity. Leah Thomas is not a woman. Leah Thomas has X and Y chromosomes. Leah Thomas is a man who has taken hormones to develop certain female characteristics and is called in the popular press and by many of the authorities a transgender woman. But that is actually not the case at all in the eyes of the living God, who made man male and female. Biology matters. It's God's biology that matters. Now, just in terms of clarification, a few things that perhaps need to be cleared up here. Let's be quite clear that intersex and transgender are not the same thing. There are babies born with genuine intersex conditions. Very, very small proportion, according to Wikipedia, 1 in 500, no, that's 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 5,000 of babies present with ambiguous genitals. It really is a very, very small number. It does happen. And in those cases, the medics would give very sensitive direction to parents as to the best way to proceed, both physically and psychologically. There is such a thing as gender dysphoria. It's been recognized for quite some time, but it's been recognized as a psychiatric disorder, akin to that woman who thought that she was a wolf. A sense of mismatch between someone's sex and their gender. It is a wrong and a false view of oneself that has been treated that way for a very long time, until recently, when it's begun to be seen as something so much more common and almost to be encouraged in some cases. What I mean is this: yes, we should avoid gender stereotyping. Yet it's not wrong to make generalizations about male and female. On the whole, there are certain characteristics of males and females that tend to hold sway in all sorts of cultures. But let me just say again, we should avoid gender stereotyping in this sense. If a boy prefers to play with dolls or play house or do things that are associated more with girls or vice versa, it is quite wrong, indeed wicked, to say to a boy, you might really be a girl inside, or to say to a girl, well, you might really be a boy inside. This is what has been happening recently. And this is where we have to be so very, very wise and to know the truth, to know that there is truth, and the truth is being taken hostage at a time like this. As I said before, to be human is to be relational. Why? Because our God is relational. God is three persons, Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And when God makes man in his own image, he makes man to be relational as he is. That's why he made man male and female. That's why it says in Genesis 2, verse 18, the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." And that is about marriage, but it's about more than marriage. It's about the whole area of human companionship. Ultimately, we need to be connected. We need to be related. It's at the very heart of being a human being, to be in relationship, to love, to be loved, to give to others, and to receive from others as well. And that is something that we desperately need to understand and recapture at a time like this. I want to finish with this question. And this was put to me in a meeting about 6 weeks ago. A very wise pastor went through this question, and he made the following points in answer to it. Who do you belong to? In particular, who do young people belong to? Who do they belong to? Think about it. If you're a young person, say under the age of 18, who do you belong to? What do you think? Well, you don't belong to the state. You don't belong to your school. You don't belong to any political system. In many totalitarian countries, that's what really happens, is that young children are assumed to belong to the state or to belong to the education system, and they take possession of them, they own them, they can indoctrinate them, and they can more or less control them. And that is not at all what the Bible states. Secondly, children don't belong to their parents to do with just as they want. In some ancient cultures, parents might expose their newborn children to wild animals and to the elements, or sacrifice them, and all sorts of evil things. But children do not belong to their parents even now. Children and all people do not belong to themselves. We are not our own. We have no ultimate control over ourselves. We can't bring ourselves into the world. We can't change certain factors about ourselves, no matter how hard we may try. We don't belong to ourselves. We belong to the God who made us all and who owns us all. And that's the point I want to leave us with. Where do we get our identity from? Where do we get our sex and our gender from? Where do we get all that we are from? From the God who made every one of us. And that is a note that needs to be sounded by churches, by pastors, by Christians, in Christian schools, in youth groups, at a time when it's being roundly and widely denied. So I hope you've found this interesting, enlightening, helpful. I hope more than that, that you've been persuaded of what you've heard today, and you'll think about it again in the time ahead. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.